Hello, I'm John and welcome to John's Box, my YouTube channel, and to another edition of Famous Swindonians Alive and Dead, and this is part 5. Up to now I've featured on this channel the famous Swindonians of Diana Dawes, David Murray John, Rick Davis, and most recently, 6 months ago, William Stanier. Today I'm going to feature someone who is probably one of the least known, but I would say most prominent Swindonians, that being Ralph Bates. Today's going to be in the form of a monologue presentation. There is little by way of resources online about Ralph Bates, so I prepared a presentation as follows. There'll be an introduction, which is actually taking place right now, his early years, what happened when he left Swindon, the Spanish Civil War, post-war, his death, and his legacy, with some mention of Swindon there as well. So I'll just put this here. Hope you can see it. There's the legacy at the end. Ralph Bates entered this world in Moore Street, Swindon. That's more or less in the town centre. It's one of those streets which run down to Commercial Road, and he was born on the 3rd of November 1899. He lived until the year 2000. He died when he was 101 years old. He actually grew up in some village, though it's not known which. He described in his book which was in 4 miles outside the factory town, which he, as I've just mentioned, described. The factory town meant Swindon, of course. On leaving school, he entered an apprenticeship in the repair yards of the Great Western Railway as a fitter, turner and erector. So his background was rather working class. Then in 1916 he volunteered for service in the Royal Flying Corps, but was turned down. He did, however, serve as an infantryman with the 16th Queen's Royal West Surrey Regiment, achieving the rank of Lance Corporal. Then he returned again to the GWR, but dissatisfied with factory work, went to Paris and worked, would you believe it, as a street cleaner. So now I'll move on to the next part, which is upon leaving Swindon. So in 1923 he went on to Spain, a country he had wanted to visit since boyhood, and his great-grandfather was a steamer captain and was buried in Cadiz. He stayed in Spain for some time from then on, travelling and doing some odd jobs. He returned to London and married Winifred Sanford, a socialist who taught in London's East End, and they supported the Communist Party of Great Britain, which Ralph also joined that year. He published his first book, Sierra, which was a collection of short stories, in 1933. In 1936 saw the publication of his best-known work, The Olive Field, about olive workers in southern Spain. The book received good critical notices in the United States, and for such writing, Bates was hailed as a master of the proletarian novel, a genre offering a new set of narrative concerns and characters. So now let's look at his involvement in the Spanish Civil War. So when the Spanish Civil War began in 1936, Bates was walking in the Pyrenees with his wife Winifred, and he immediately enlisted with the government forces, initially working in propaganda and information services, and made the rank of political commissar. In October 1936, he visited the British Tom Man Centuria. Later that year, he travelled to the United States to raise awareness of the plight of the Spanish Republic. He was briefly arrested for arms smuggling when travelling through France back to Spain in February 1937. In May 1937, he addressed the British battalion at Jarama about the May disorders in Catalonia, following the party line that it was all the fault of the Trotskyist and spies. He moved to Madrid, and in June 1937 he escorted Harry Pollitt, British communist leader, who was visiting Madrid. He frequently travelled to the United States and Mexico, meeting his future wife, Eve Saltzman, on one of those trips. That was just before the Second World War. The International Brigades made him, and he edited their English language paper, Volunteer for Liberty. In that he wrote pieces about the war for such London journals as Left Review. His wife Winifred worked as a nurse. In 1937, the Communist Party sent him to the USA to drum up financial support and to attract more volunteers for the war in Spain. Madison Square Gardens held a huge rally, and Bates became most popular with the American left. At such a meeting, he met Eva Haxman, whom he married in 1942 after divorcing Winifred. After the 1939 collapse of the Spanish Republic, Ralph Bates moved to Mexico, and that provided a setting for his novel, The Fields of Paradise. He resigned from the Communist Party with the signing of the Stalin-Hitler Pact in 1939 and was to settle in New York, getting involved in trying to get the USA to enter the Second World War, which they did only after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So now let's look at the post-war period, or rather still on the war and then post-war, because at the end of the Spanish Civil War, he moved to Mexico, where he lived for a number of years, publishing The Fields of Paradise, which I have already mentioned. In 1947, he became a professor of creative writing and English literature at New York University, a post he would hold until his retirement in 1966. He published his last book, The Dolphin in the Wood, in 1950, although he would continue to work on several unfinished writings up to his death 50 years later. He was an energetic man. His energy levels were the stuff of fable. He organized unions and swam and climbed. The Spanish dubbed him El Fantastico. His need for money drove him to take up writing, and he was in touch with literary comrades and friends in London. In fact, he appears to have travelled back and forth between Spain and London, with London publishers publishing his books. After his retirement, he moved with his wife to the Greek island of Naxos, where he pursued his lifelong hobby of mountain climbing well into his 80s. So he died in Manhattan in the year 2000, aged 101, and his cremated remains were scattered actually on that island of Naxos. Well, it seems that the recipe for a long life is a physical body and an active brain. The year 2000 obituary described him as a novelist who evoked Spain and then fought Franco. This is some of the things that the New York Times wrote in that obituary. Almost 60 years ago, he was considered by some to be one of the best writers in Spain. He stands out as perhaps the best informed, not even excepting André Malraux or Ernest Hemingway. So now we'll look at his legacy. It's a fascinating story, not well told in Swindon. One local writer said, "Here was a writer of international stature who was criminally unrecognised in the town of his birth. Unlike fellow Swindon writers Richard Jefferies and Alfred Williams, he remains almost completely obscure." Michael Yates, a retired folklorist, is author of a new book called Ralph Bates, Swindon's Unknown Author. And here we have a picture of Ralph Bates holding that biography. This particular author spent much of his career gathering and comparing the old stories and songs of England, Scotland, and the Appalachian region of the US. He stumbled across Bates while researching articles for the Journal of the Friends of Swindon Museum and Art Gallery. Mr. Yates mentions in the biography that Bates was a gifted scholar, but like many young working-class Swindon men at the time, his background dictated his career, and the GWR works beckoned. He went on to serve in the infantry during World War I, following an abortive attempt to join the Royal Flying Corps. This is interesting because all the other boys on the course were from public school. He mentioned Marlborough first and said 2 of them were really stroppy with him and didn't like him. I wonder why. Well, there are many in Wiltshire who consider Swindon to be Wiltshire's backyard. Bates himself wrote, "I was not a gentleman, and 1 or 2 courageous snobs in the wing had let me know it." His biographer added, "He thought the officer class, with 1 or 2 exceptions, and weren't fit to lead anybody." In 1918, he went to a public meeting in London about the Russian Revolution. He was arrested for being in uniform at this meeting and spent 2 weeks being marched around the parade square in full uniform and pack as a punishment. When he came out of the war, he was pretty anti the class system and the establishment, which explained why he went on to join the Communist Party, and the rest is history. It is not known if Ralph Bates ever came back to Swindon after leaving, but as a mark of respect for this Swindon-born genius, Swindon Heritage are raising funds to install a blue plaque in Swindon to celebrate the life of this internationally renowned writer. There is a blue plaque to him in Bedford Square, London, currently, and it is hoped for one to be erected in Swindon one day. I've actually written to one of the activists of famous Swindonians, who wrote back to tell me that presently they are still raising funds. So maybe if you contact Swindon Heritage, find out more, perhaps you'd like to raise some funds too. I have mentioned the book as well. Just looking for where I've put... maybe you'd like to buy that. The book is available on Amazon, maybe in some reputable bookshops locally. Might be an idea to read a lot more about the life of this prolific person. Well, that's more or less everything about Ralph Bates. Perhaps you know more, or perhaps I've omitted something. You may want to share your views or comments or about the life of Ralph Bates in my comments section on my channel. Perhaps of some information that he did indeed visit Swindon after the Second World War. That would be interesting to find out then. It seems there's no information about that. Perhaps you know more than I do. By the way, please support my channel, help it to grow. Without your support, of course I will be able to make films, but it's always nice to have likes and additional subscribers to keep in touch. There are another 15 more famous Swindonians that I would like to make a video about on my channel. which I would like to feature. And we're going to choose another one now. They're all here, they've been cut out. So let's see who Ralph Bates is going to pass the buck to for the next edition of Famous Swindonians, hopefully coming very shortly. And the honour of that person is David Howell, born in 1975, who's a professional golfer. There you have it. Swindon actually has its own professional golfer. That will be in the next edition of Famous Swindonians, past and present, dead and alive. That's about it for today. Thanks for sticking with me to the end of this, and I hope you enjoyed it. And as I mentioned, your comments are welcome. They add to the feedback. Thank you again, and bye for now.